Europa, did you do all that just to hide your massive fart? It didn't work. You're disgusting.
Nine years. 9 years have passed since a curse spread across the land, stealing away the world's color and leaving those afflicted to die or, worse, live on and suffer. One of these unfortunate survivors is a young girl named Europa. Having lost her parents at a young age, she lingers in this wretched world, scrounging for scraps and devoting what little energy she has to searching for a cure to a disease nobody living knows anything about. Among the cries of suffering and the stench of death, rumors persist. A castle atop the back of a giant. That's where the curse originates. And though the rumors say none who enter are ever seen again, Europa's resolve does not waver. After all, she's already lost everything else. 9 Years of Shadow is tough to pin down. On the one hand, I like this game for so many reasons, most of which having to do with its aesthetics and presentation, as well as the flying companion. This is a trope I will never not be a sucker for. But on the other hand, it's glaringly obvious to anyone who's actually played the game that 9 Years of Shadows is a basic at best. After the initial fascination for its gorgeous veneer and entrancing lo-fi beats wears off, you're left with a mediocre and unbalanced Metroidvania that peaks just as much as it valleys. But possibly the most disheartening part about 9 Years of Shadows is that the final product wasn't what I expected. As someone who's been following this game and has been excited to play it for years, it's tough not to feel a little disappointed when a lot of the cool stuff I saw in the early trailers didn't make the cut. It's not uncommon for projects to change during production, but still. I mean, just look at this guy. I wanted to meet him. And some of these locales got me excited. Now, don't get me wrong, I still like the game we got. But I gotta ask the question, is 9 Years of Shadows really worth playing for people who don't get hopelessly bewitched by floating teddy bears in pajamas? Let's find out. Combat in 9 Years of Shadows is another hard thing to pin down. Ultimately, I liked it, but it left a lot to be desired. For instance, Europa begins with 2 standard attacks and ends with 2 standard attacks and a charged attack. She doesn't gain any additional halberd skills, and that's a shame, especially because she can't even hit diagonally or downward, limiting your approach to every combat scenario. To add some flavor to the combat, Europa can seamlessly switch her armor with a press of a button to add elements to her strikes. Bright outlines around enemies indicate their elemental weakness, and all Europa has to do is match the color to get the additional damage against them. It's nothing groundbreaking, and unfortunately never evolves beyond increasing your DPS. Another unfortunate side effect is that the outlines conjure up painful flashbacks of Harmony of Dissonance. No. Thankfully, the floating teddy bear Apino is there to save the day by offering up, honestly, one of the coolest life bar mechanics I've ever seen in a Metroidvania, the light shield system. Like most MVs, your character has HP. Take too much damage and Europa can only initially take 2 hits before she bites the dust. But as long as she has something in her light meter, she's essentially invincible. Obviously, getting hit depletes your light, and once it's gone, you're vulnerable to attacks. You can replenish your light shield either by attacking and killing enemies, or by doing the most incredible thing ever mapped to any button ever. Hug
she's the one, Cole.
Your teddy bear who's wearing pajamas. When I first heard about this mechanic, I thought it'd be game breaking. All I have to do is replenish my force field and I'll never die? Pfft, that sounds like something you'd put in your game so even a games journalist could beat it. Imagine my surprise once I got my hands on the game and discovered how nuanced the system truly was. We can't just tank and spank our ways through this one, boys. Well, not through all of it, but we'll get to the rubber band difficulty in a bit. The light shield mechanic leads to some pretty engaging and intense circumstances. Should I use the downtime during a boss battle to retreat and hug my bear? Or risk it all and continue wailing on the boss instead? This risk-reward aspect compounds if you want to do even more damage by having your bear get in on the action. Apino can use the light meter to fire projectiles, adding versatility and range to your repertoire, as well as additional damage at the expense of losing your shield and becoming vulnerable. So, even if you're at max light shield when you break the boss's poise, you can maximize damage by shooting projectiles while you bash in their heads. It's a great feeling, but you gotta be careful. If you expend all your light meter, you're only a couple of hits away from death. But if you're good, you can Gears of War reload half your light meter instantly the moment it gets exhausted, regardless if it's from taking damage or from firing projectiles. You only get one shot though. If you miss it, you gotta hug that bear. But if you nail it, oh baby, does it feel great. This technique becomes crucial in the late game because some of those bosses, they don't like pausing their assault so you can hug your bear. Frickin' animals. I love the light shield mechanic. It adds a lot to combat and is actually really cool and unique. Speaking of really cool and unique, let's talk about Europa's armor, because that's where a bulk of her traversal abilities come from. There are 4 sets of armor in total, and the 3 you can find can eventually unlock different transformations. The Poseidon armor allows Europa to dive in the water and transform into a siren so she can swim up waterfalls. The Gaia armor allows Europa to breathe while in poisonous environments and transforms into a serpent so she can tunnel in designated areas. And the Helios armor allows Europa to enter areas with intense heat, and transforms her into a phoenix so she can glide on drafts and explode, which is more useful than it sounds. Essentially, each armor unlocks portions of biomes by trivializing an environmental hazard while also giving a transformation that can be used in specific areas. It becomes formulaic, but the transformations genuinely add a lot to the game's puzzles and platforming. Leaping from waterfall to waterfall as the siren is stupid fun. Not all abilities are tied to armor. Europa gets the tried and true double jump and the always appreciated downward kick that lets her hop on enemies' heads. Apino also gets abilities to help open up the map. They mostly involve upgrading his shot, making them stronger as well as acting as varying levels of keys against gatekeeping obstacles. All in all, Europa's abilities are pretty standard for an MV, with Apino essentially acting as an upgradable key. The more unique abilities are found within the armor sets and their transformations, but these abilities are more for platforming than combat, which I feel is a missed opportunity. Sure, each armor has an elemental affinity to potentially increase damage, but how cool would it have been if each armor got a special halberd attack or increased your defenses against certain colored attacks? Kinda like the polarity mechanic in Ikaruga or Wonder Labyrinth. There's tons of untapped potential here that could have made for some epic boss fights. Not that the boss battles were bad, some were, but there were a lot of really great bosses in this game. Not just in design, because let's be real, they all look phenomenal, but also in challenge. This is where the rubber band difficulty I mentioned earlier comes into play. Some of these bosses are an absolute joke. Like, what's this dwarf even doing? And this tomato throwing man bear pig?
I'm cereal.
The dwarf's a very early boss, so I can understand its 2-move artillery. But man bear pig? I fought that thing way after this thing, and this thing kicked my ass. It's not uncommon to come up against a roadblock of a boss that'll knock you around for a bit, but it's equally as likely that you'll find a boss that just... Yeah, nice try, buddy. Largely, I enjoyed the boss fights. Whether they were a walk in the park or an oddly placed difficulty spike, most were a spectacle to behold. And there's a lot of them too. I actually think there are more bosses in this game than there are enemy types. Give me a sec. Let me just skim through the bestiary here. Man, I was close. 15 bosses and 18 enemy types. Probably 20 because I missed a couple. That's a lot of bosses, which I love, but that's not a lot of enemy types. It sounds like a good amount, but when there are 11 biomes, the recycling of enemies gets noticeable. They try to overcompensate with palette swaps and adding different elemental outlines, but it does little to mix up the gameplay. It's not the biggest deal because the boss fights are so good, for the most part, and the game is more focused on platforming during exploration anyway, which it does pretty well. There's a platforming section in this one biome that focuses on the Phoenix transformation that I thought was tons of fun. Very challenging, very intense, very satisfying. This particular part was a nail biter because one hit and I'm dead. And because this game has no autosave or checkpoints, it meant I'd have to go all the way back to my last save and retrieve all the items I had found over again. Not having checkpoints sucked, especially when there were those rare moments when you fought 2 bosses before finding another save point. Most of the biomes in 9 Years of Shadows are pretty standard, but they work. There's the normal castle biome, then the water biome, plant biome, and fire biome. The late game biomes are far more interesting, but there's a pervading sense of sameness throughout all of them. But that design was intentional. The game's map takes place atop a giant's back where 3 ancient tribes came together and built the castle you're exploring. So it makes sense that most of the biomes follow a castle motif. The entire game takes place in a castle. With that setup, I think the devs did a great job differentiating the bios either with platforming set pieces or by fleshing out the backgrounds. And man, some of these backgrounds are stunning. Often I just chill, vibe with the music, and take in some of the scenery. But when I wasn't just vibing, I was exploring. And this is where 9 Years of Shadows shows its basicness the most. There's nothing wrong with the game's exploration. It just doesn't do a whole lot to stick out or keep you interested. There are two types of musical notes to find that increase your light meter and vitality, towering lore crystals that flesh out the world, but to what end I couldn't tell you, and armor parts you take to the blacksmith so he can upgrade your armor sets, allowing you to do more damage. Increasing your stats and upgrading armor require currency, whatever it's called. I don't think they named it in the game, but you could find caches of that as well, though I never had an issue with currency, so don't worry too much about it. The last thing you can find are band members who offer you a side quest. And I say a side quest because it's always the same. Kill an optional boss. Sometimes it's 2 bosses. One time it was 4 bosses. Regardless, they want blood, which seems really weird coming from the hippie chick with the violin. And the reward is always the same. A light shard, which is something you don't know what to do with till the end game. It's fine, but more immediate rewards would have been more gratifying. It would have made me look forward to doing these side quests. Instead, I just kinda did them if I came across them. Needless to say, the game could have done with more things to find and just more secrets in general. Finding another note behind another false wall only gets the dopamine flowing for so long before I need a hit from something else. Besides adding more things to discover, something else that could have made exploration better is a fast travel system. Platform-heavy MVs especially benefit from fast travel because redoing platforming sections while backtracking never feels great, and this game doesn't provide enough shortcuts to warrant them not having a fast travel system. The world's laid out in a hub format, with a central biome connecting to every other biome. There's tons of elevators that give you Metroid Fusion type musings and exposition, but these elevators only go between adjacent biomes, meaning you can't just use one elevator to go to any other elevator. You can only go up and down, which I can hear you now. That's how elevators work, dummy. Sure, but we're in a castle on a giant's back. I could suspend my disbelief a little more if you wanted to make magic elevators too. As it stands, with the current unmagical elevators, if you have to backtrack, you're going to feel every second of it. But the game really doesn't require you to backtrack, which, ironically, is disappointing given the fast travel predicament. There's a couple of areas in the central hub that you can revisit and find things once you have certain abilities, but other than that, as long as you're observant, you can find everything in a biome on your first visit. And there's never any reason to revisit biomes because 9 Years of Shadows is a very linear game. But if you do miss something in a biome, good luck finding it. There's no way to tell if there's anything you missed in a biome or not. It'd be nice if the map showed a percentage of items found in a biome, even if that percentage guide was something that you had to find or earn in game. Quite frankly, 9 Years of Shadows map leaves a lot to desire. It's functional, but you can't mark it up if needed. And just look at this scroll. This is zooming out in real time. I need you to understand my pain. I need you to hurt like I hurt. Okay, let's talk about something positive. The game's atmosphere. If I haven't said it yet, then I'll make it perfectly clear now. This game is gorgeous. I love its art style. The colors and environments are just so well done. And I love its character designs. Not just Apino, but Europa. Her dress and armor combo is just so cool. And this game's music, man. Apparently the game's tuned to a hertz level that's called the healing frequency. I'm not a music theory guy. All I know is I really like what I'm hearing. Move over, lo-fi girl. There's a new track list about to dominate my writing sessions. And that brings us to the game's narrative. The setting is intriguing, the twist is cool, and the ending is satisfying and endearing. I truly loved the game's ending and message. However, I felt everything else about the story fell flat. Granted, 9 Years of Shadows doesn't do anything wrong. It's more like they did everything rushed. Europa has a character arc revolving around how she doesn't like to get close to people in fear of getting hurt. Though the resolution to that arc is satisfying, it could have used some fleshing out to make me care about her sooner. It isn't until the game's twist, when we finally get to see Europa's humanity and flaws, that we start to care. I mean, kudos to have me caring about her at all. Not all Metroidvania protagonists make me give a shit about them. I also would have liked to have seen NPCs doing a little more to add some character to the game, especially from Dreyfus, Europa's former trainer slash traveling companion. I feel like their relationship could have been explored a lot more and led to some much needed conflict. There wasn't a whole lot of tension in this game. We know Europa's motivations, and we kinda know the stakes. If she doesn't stop the curse, it'll get worse and kill more people, I guess. But we're not really invested in this world, nor do we know the extent to how terrible the curse actually is. It kills people somehow and drains the world of color. Those things are bad, but I would have liked to have seen this curse in action, or at least see the aftermath of one of its outbreaks. Instead, we're stuck inside admiring this castle's beautiful environments. It's counterintuitive and minimizes, if not completely erases, the game's threat. The castle's beauty would have been more impactful had we gotten to experience the ugliness outside. What if instead of the hub being at the castle's entrance, it was a decrepit settlement full of blighted NPCs located just outside the castle? We'd get to see the wrecked world, experience the curse firsthand, and interact with NPCs who'd flesh out the world and offer diverse side quests. My reading of the narrative is that the game's an allegory for the healing power of the creative mind, and how creativity brings people together. What better way to show this than by using the game's orchestra you assemble throughout your journey to heal the blighted NPCs and directly fight back against the curse destroying their lives. Maybe their music even brings a little bit of color with them outside the castle. Considering the game's own music is set to a healing frequency, this scenario's thematically perfect. So perfect that I'm convinced the devs were actually going to do something like this, but had to cut it due to budget and/or time constraints. Man, I'm breaking my own heart over here with the scenario I just made up in my head. Anyway, I know that's asking for a lot, but it adds so much to the game. Tension, world building, thematic reinforcement. And it'd make players understand and appreciate the colors within the castle, as well as make exploring the castle feel much more meaningful. I suppose the last thing I'll say about the narrative is that there's only one ending, which is especially egregious when this game sets up a perfect opportunity for multiple endings with its twist. Now, I'm not going to spoil the twist. I'll just say that the twist has the potential to be a decision, and allowing players to discover how they could make that decision would have been awesome. Players could think there's only one heinous choice to make, but through thorough exploration, they could discover on their own that there's a more righteous path. Maybe take what Europa learns during the twist and instead sprinkle it throughout the adventure for players to discover on their own. Maybe then have players collect some super secret MacGuffins, take the MacGuffins to the decision point, and then boom, players have earned themselves an alternate ending where Europa chooses to overcome her flaw of pushing people away and instead embraces someone who would suffer her similar fate of self-inflicted isolation and loneliness. Man, now that would have been powerful and exceptional storytelling. Metroidvania fanatics would have eaten that shit up. But what do I know? I'm just one of the biggest Metroidvania fans of all time. 9 Years of Shadows is not a perfect game. But what is? I heard it had a lot of technical issues when it launched on Steam. Slowdown and crashes mostly. I can't speak to it as I waited until the game was released on the Switch. During my playthrough, I only experienced one technical issue, and it was against a late game optional boss. As you can see, or rather can't see, he was invisible in my Switch footage. He also brought with him so much slowdown and controller latency that I seriously couldn't beat him. That's why I only have 99% on my game file. Despite this hiccup in my criticisms, I love this game. There's obvious missed potential, and its by-the-books basic Metroidvania approach doesn't do a whole lot to make it stick out from the saturated market. Its linearity and largely uneventful exploration does little to excite hardened Metroidvania enthusiasts. But that doesn't mean there isn't something good here. Aside from its stellar presentation and music, the majority of the boss fights were challenging and memorable, especially the final boss fight. And I think the light shield system is one of the coolest quote-unquote healing mechanics we've ever had in an MV. Platforming was done well, with the biomes within the paintings really showcasing some fun platforming sections. In the end, I'm glad I played 9 Years of Shadows, and I'm genuinely looking forward to HALBERD Studios' next endeavor, Mariachi Legends. But it's time I circle back to the question I posed at the beginning of this video. Is 9 Years of Shadows worth playing for people who don't get hopelessly bewitched by floating teddy bears in pajamas? For hardcore Metroidvania vets? Maybe. It's a 5-hour-long romp with gorgeous visuals and beautiful music that poses a decent challenge with some of its bosses. And you should seriously check out that light shield mechanic. It really is neat. As for MV noobs, 9 Years of Shadows might be the perfect gateway Metroidvania. Backtracking's light, secrets are pretty easy to find, it's more platforming and combat focused, and it's short. But regardless of whichever camp you're in, make sure you come with a high tolerance for cringe. Because the game's final biome is, and I'm not kidding, A nearly 5-minute vertical climb with nothing but portraits and busts of Kickstarter backers, punctuated by the final boss. It's just the worst. I seriously can't think of a worse way to end something.